Now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Cleo Shields. She has more than 25 years of experience in the translation industry on both the client and the vendor sides. She has held several leadership positions in different organizations with a focus on life sciences. The nearly 16 years she spent in Medtronic, Lionbridge Life Sciences, and Cyan gave her the critical experience needed in this highly regulated niche. Since August 2018, Cleo serves as the Global Director of Life Sciences at CQ Fluency. From 2005 till 2018, Cleo organized and moderated the Life Sciences Business Roundtable in the different parts of Europe. In September 2016, she was elected as a board member of the European Language Industry Association. And in October 2018, she assumed the role of president of elia. So welcome, and could you please tell us about...
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. What kind of documents do you translate, and what special skills does medical translation require?
Let me look at this from a different angle. So I want to tell you a little story about my mother, true story. She's 85 years old. She's a heart patient. She has been taking medication for over 2 decades, right? 6, 7, 8 medication, morning, afternoon, evening. So 10 days ago, I get a phone call at 2 o'clock at night from the hospital that my mother had fallen down the stairs, and that she was admitted to the hospital with a concussion. Fast forward, my sisters and myself rushed to the hospital. Long story short, the doctor told me that after they did a lot of tests, neurological tests, that in addition to having a severe concussion, she has also the onset of something that we differently call as becoming very forgetful. So she's very sad about that, is receiving new medication, and now a couple of weeks later she's experiencing all kinds of side effects. So she calls me and said, I'm getting this medication since October 8th, and why am I nauseous and dizzy and running to the toilet every 5 minutes? So I go to her, and she gives me the package. So I have a similar package here with me. I just want to demonstrate it. So I open it, nice package, little. It has a braille here, Leticia, here, right? So I open it. There's a little room for the tablet, and then I get this huge package leaflet. I just want to... And it's in Dutch, so my mother was looking at the side effects. It's a very small font, it's font 2.5, I would almost say, and you can hardly read it. And then after 2 hours, she found the side effect, but she went straight to, the last one, where it says shock, hallucinations, severe depression, and, anyways. The point that I want to make is, I'm not saying that it's useless what we're doing. On the contrary, I think it's really essential that we're doing this, because for me, this particular piece of paper is the symbol of the work that we do in the medical sector, right? It's actually, for me, the symbol of patient safety. What is very important, this information needs to be available to the patient, it needs to be accessible to the patient, it needs to be readable to the patient, what Leticia said about readability testing, and it also needs traceable. So why am I saying traceable? Some of you who work in this sector or have read about this sector might know about quite some scandals that have transpired in this industry. I'm just going to mention one that was already 7 years ago, but people still talk about it. The PIP scandal in France, where a French manufacturer who manufactured silicone breast implants had used silicons that are only for industrial use. And so a lot of women who had these silicons experienced severe health issues, but very severe health issues, up to the point that, they started leaking and, with potential fatalities. So that was probably also one of the triggers for, the health regulators, including the European Union, to start looking again at all the regulations. And in the past years, as you might know, this has become a very big focus for the European Commission and the European Union. And with that, we are now 5 months away from basically formalizing the new medical device regulation and the regulation for in vitro diagnostics. I think for MDR it's May 2020, and the other one is, I think, 2 years later in May. But that also goes to traceability. For example, back then in 2012, they wanted to track down all the women who had received this product, and they couldn't. So now they have changed that. And one of the changes, for example, is that everything needs to be traceable up to the barcode, the QR code. So if you're getting a product and it's inserted or implanted in your body, and something happens and they have to retract it from the market, they have to be able to track you or you down and get the product, let me say, out of your body. So that is one thing. And for medical devices, you might have heard of the unique device identifier. That's also something that they do on medical equipment. A little bit back to the question of Eva. So I did receive a couple of questions prior to this presentation about the documents and the skills that medical translators should have. Well, I think I see it a little bit in 3 layers, right? So the first thing is maybe like the hardcore, straightforward requirements. If you look at ISO 17100, they say, there are some specifications with regards to your education, with regards to your maybe work experience, your experience in the business, and so forth. So those are really like hardcore objectives that would apply for medical devices and life science as much as it would apply maybe for legal or for any other type of documentation. A second layer, in my view, would be, let's say, really the subject matter expertise, the specialization. And I think it was a lady there, you asked the question about how to make a choice, right? How to specialize in the previous panel. I think that comes into play definitely when you, for example, want to translate in healthcare. I think both clinicians, I would say the medical staff, as well as the patient, will feel more associated, more empathy, or will feel more closer to people, not only because they speak their native language, but also they know what they're talking about. And I'm leaving aside the discussion that we had in the main panel about, sometimes you have no choice and you have to diversify because you have to make a living, right? So, but I think that subject matter expertise as a unique selling point is definitely also very good. And then the third point, what I feel is very important, and is that is also something that we carry in our logo, in our company, is CQ, which is emotional intelligence. And I would like to translate that as self-awareness and empathy. So if you look at the type of documentation, coming to Ivana's question, I know that, Leticia, you have actually mentioned a lot of types of documentation already on the screen. Every type of medical documentation requires a different type of approach, a different workflow, a different, sometimes also even a different resource, right? And I want to just give 3 examples. Let's say if you are more in the technical space, like medical devices is oftentimes medical technical translations. So you translate IFUs, patient manuals, physician manuals, software manuals. So there you would do, I would almost say, hardcore localization. On the other hand, however, there's already the onset of cultural adaptation. And the example that I would like to make, that I always make, is that we, talking about source deviating from the target, is that in the English short, when I was working at Medtronic, we were doing a translation for the diabetes unit. And it says kind of an example in a leaflet or a brochure saying that about, glucose monitoring and giving yourself an insulin shot because the dosage depends on what you have eaten, when you have eaten it, how long ago, and so forth. It says that Peter would then give himself an insulin shot at 6 o'clock after eating his Jello pudding. But, if you translate that into Italian, first of all, they don't, their name is not Peter. They don't eat Jello pudding, but they maybe eat tiramisu. And they don't eat at 6, and they eat at 8. So that already requires, talking to the experts in the country and see how you would translate that. So that's something that is more like technical. Then you move more to the other areas where cultural adaptation, transcreation becomes more of an issue. I would call it cultural adaptation, and that brings me to both the hospital environment that Simone was talking about, as well as everything that has to do with clinical study prior to, translating the brochure, the leaflet, according to what you said, MEDRA and the QRD templates and everything. So in hospitals, for example, I have hospital clients, but they are in New York. So our company is also based in Ireland. But as Simone said, there are all kinds of people, and in the state is probably even more diverse. At some point you can have somebody from Vietnam who only speaks Eo Minh, which is a special dialect of Vietnamese. I had never heard of that. I really never heard of that, and it took us really 3 weeks to track something down. There, I would say, in a hospital setting where where people come in and sometimes have to fill out a questionnaire about what their diet is. Not diet, I want to lose weight, but just what is your food pattern, and requires a lot of cultural adaptation. And that's what I mean by empathy from translators like yourself. Of course, a lot of how things need to be translated is regulated, right? It's also it's simply regulated by law, by regulations, how things need to be done. But if you work in this space longer, you can basically always, you're in a hospital, you open a question, you say, oh, this needs to be cultural adapted. So you kind of get a sense of it. It grows on you, right? And maybe one example that maybe I should say, there was one question saying that, and it was from somebody in the Middle East, with all due, very respectful of that, of course. It said, how many times do you have sexual intercourse with your partner? And that is like a big red cross, right? Because in certain religions, you either have sex with your husband or with your wife, but with nobody else. And we are a free society. So those are little examples where you really have to take into consideration the differences. And maybe last but not least, Eva, is again this whole way of translating like clinical. But you also said, for example, you have there's particular items within the clinical space, like patient-reported outcomes and particular, they call them quality of life questionnaires that have very detailed questions about let's say, the patients that have been recruited for those clinical trials, where cultural adaptation is mandatory. And in the clinical space, we call that linguistic validation. And that basically means that if you have a patient-reported outcome and need to be translated, it needs to be forward translated by 2 persons minimum. Sometimes they even take 3. And then these 3, let's say Spanish translations, for example, need to be consolidated back to 1. Further, then you follow the workflow, and then further down in the process, it's kind of a readability test, but in the clinical space, they call this cognitive debrief. So we work together with clinicians, we hire patients in the target language, and we conduct interviews with these patients to see whether they understand the text, which is basically what you're saying about the readability testing. So that's basically to indicate a little bit the sensitivities and the difference between the type of documentation that you translate. One last example, because I had it not too long ago. It was about a single-use syringe, right? So when you go to the hospital and you draw blood, those syringes are usually thrown away, right? They're not sterilized. They're not even sterilized. So in an English source, it says, after use, please discard in the red basket. In my country, it's in a yellow basket. In Spain, it can be in a green basket. So these are really things that, and sometimes, if you might know, you have sometimes 3-4 baskets next to each other, and each color represents a different type of waste. So that's also very important. My final words, and then I'll stop. I just want to re-emphasize again is that I think this is a great profession. I don't want to say that other industries are not good, but I think we do very valuable work, and I think that the profession of translators will always exist. Personally, I have a very big soft spot for life sciences, and in general, for all of you, whether it's life sciences or consumer goods or translating, transcripts from the European Parliament. We have done that as well. As long as you like what you do, I think you're going to be better by default. Thank you.